Hello, and thank you to my colleagues and dissertation committee for your attendance this evening. I have this opportunity to present to several of my student colleagues, past faculty, departmental leadership Michelle Collet, and my dissertation advisor Marilyn Newell. My name is Henry Moser, and my professional and graduate work here at UNE centers on supporting online graduate students. The following presentation is a proposal for a formal qualitative phenomenological study regarding synchronous academic support for online graduate students to be completed early next year. This project acts as the required dissertation necessary to receive a doctorate in education at the University of New England. My presentation this evening will be a succinct tour of the history and future of the proposed study, its origin and theoretical underpinnings, goals, methodology, and possible implications of the findings on current online graduate student academic support. As most of you know, much of my professional and academic life revolves around UNE and online graduate schooling. Beyond my status as an online doctoral student here, I am the e-learning specialist as well. This position requires my intimate work with other online graduate students in the areas of writing support, content tutoring, and learning strategies specific to this ever-growing learning environment. This unique job and past and current online learning experiences have made me a true advocate for the student population. My larger motivations for studying the impacts of live academic support is to add to the knowledge base of how to best support these students academically. Specifically, I'm motivated to demonstrate the benefits of a live support system for online graduate students, how to better create connections between institutions and students, and finally, the positive effects of web conferencing technology. Later in this presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about the UNE setting that we're all quite familiar with. The theory that drives the proposed study is Michael Moore's 1972 theory of transactional distance. It states, in any educational setting, especially distance education, there is cognitive space between instructors and learners. He argued that the greater the transactional distance, the less satisfactory the learning outcomes. Dialogue, or interaction between students and instructors, structure of the courses, and self-directedness or autonomy of the student all factor in the degree of transactional distance. Of course, we see 1972 and we wonder how that applies to online education. Moore was actually referring to correspondence courses, and labeled this teaching and learning as the first distance education, which is a common term we hear today, referring to online education, of course. As distance education grew due to technological advances and the internet, Moore teamed up with an ex-UNEer and personal mentor Greg Kearsley. Together they studied the interaction factor of transactional distance. So that would be right here, the interaction factor of transactional distance, and further identified three vital interaction types present. Literature review. Online students experience feelings of isolation and disconnect to the institution. In addition to receiving, as presented in my Chapter 2 Literature Review, online students experience feelings of isolation and disconnect to the institution, in addition to receiving inadequate academic support. These two factors contribute to unsatisfactory retention and graduation rates among online graduate students. This qualitative phenomenological study will contribute to our understanding of of online graduate students' perceptions of how working live with academic support staff impacts their interaction with, yes, the course content. So, this study will contribute to the gap in research regarding academic support usage of synchronous technologies by exploring the perceptions of online graduate students of the impacts of live support on their interaction with the content. While there is significant literature examining live interaction opportunities between facilitators and students, there is none regarding live academic success centers and students, and more narrow, there is no existing literature on the impact of these live meetings on student relationship to the content. When I go over the umbrella question or overarching question for the proposed research project is, how do live interactions between academic support staff and online graduate students impact student interaction with the content? The following four sub-questions provide support for answering this larger question. What are the student perceptions of the impacts of live academic support meetings on their interactions with and understanding of the course content? What factors of live web conferences with academic support centers do participants perceive as being more or less beneficial to their relationship with the content? To what extent do varying staff characteristics and behaviors during synchronistic support sessions impact student interactions with the content? In comparison, how do the different live support sessions, writing support, content tutoring, and learning strategy meetings impact student and content interactions? So the following themes and theories are presented in my literature review. They shape my study, and they ultimately point to my narrow point of focus. So I've mentioned Moore's theory of transactional distance, and the key takeaway from my study is that interaction is one of the three necessary components of an effective distance education course. Also, Vygotsky's theory of social development points to the need of interaction for cognitive development. Another concept present in my literature review is the fact that, is the concept that online graduate students feel isolated and disconnected to their host institutions. Another guiding theme presented in the literature review is that synchronous instruction and learning works, but it is not widely used. And finally, academic support for these students is lacking. It's not nearly as present as its counterpart face-to-face learning. So these themes and theories guided my study, and I'll present my framework in a second, and I'll present my framework to further clarify this. So instead of the metaphorical rectangular frame of a picture, my study is framed triangularly. Two larger theories and one research concept make up the vertices, which all point to the specific targeted area of study. So what am I talking about here? So the top point of my triangle comes from the literature pointing to the dearth in academic support provided to online students by the host institution. The bottom right vertex framing my study is Vygotsky's social development theory, which posits the necessity of social interaction in achieving cognitive development. The vertex in the bottom left has already been covered, but as a reminder, Moore defined a critical factor in determining transactional distance as interaction, and later Moore and Kearsley further delineated three different interaction types that online students experience: student-facilitator interaction, student-student interaction, and student-content interaction. Moving back to the top vertex in my triangular framework, we see that without needed academic support, the content understanding will be impacted. Again, so this is research-based framework information. And then adjacent to this idea is the published demonstration that synchronous instruction is proven effective. So finally, moving back to Vygotsky, we learn without interaction, which is less innate or less natural in the online environment, that content understanding is ultimately impaired. So this framework points to this area of study. These theories and the subsequent concepts and theories, this concept and these concepts and theories, pointed me to this study. So, in summary, we know interaction is important. We know academic support for this population is lacking, and that live instruction is effective in content instruction. Oh, excuse me, and we know that live instruction is effective in content understanding. So I feel it appropriate to take a look at the impacts live content tutoring and writing support offered by an academic support center has on the student's relationship to the content. So now I must ask myself, how am I going to get student perceptions on the effects of these live contacts with support staff, and how they affect student content interaction? I've chosen a qualitative research design because I'm looking to identify patterns in student thinking by looking at non-numerical data garnered through interviews. Specifically, I've chosen the phenomenological research design because it will better allow me to understand the essence of the following phenomenon. Online graduate students complete content tutoring and writing support with academic support staff in a live format employing web conferencing technology. I want to know how the students experience this phenomenon, and specifically, how it impacts their interaction with the course content. So this design allows for the garnering of a rich, in-depth description of student experience, through interviewing. It allows for the fluid framing of my study as well. And as mentioned earlier, based on the literature, I feel confident this intervention has aided in student content interaction, but through my interviewing, I'll be able to set aside this judgment and simply find the realness of this situation through pattern and theme identification. So, the proposed study will take place at a medium suburban, not-for-profit New England university that we're all pretty familiar with, 6,000 undergraduate and graduate students and over 800 online graduate students. The Student Academic Success Center, where I work, has a small division that serves only online graduate students in the areas of writing support, content tutoring, and learning strategies specific to the online graduate student. The meetings between SASE staff, and the students takes place, again, in a synchronous format using AnyMeeting and Blackboard Collaborate, two live web conferencing platforms. So the participant profile in the proposed study consists of the following. I'm going to look at interviewing 10 online graduate students in either the social work, public health, or education programs. Each student will have met with SASE staff in all three meeting types, writing support, content tutoring, and learning strategy sessions, at least one time. The time in the program ranges from, this could be their second course to near graduation. And finally, a quick discussion on the demographics of the participants. It's currently unknown, but research demonstrates the following in terms of demographics for online graduate students, that 66% of the students are female, 60% are Caucasian, 73% are employed full-time, 63% are over the age of 30, and 65% of the students live in households making less than $100,000. So again, these are hypothetical demographics. So, quickly talking about participants, the protections for the participants include that consent will be obtained at the start of each interview session, coding of the data, coding data collection, aggregated data will involve the use of pseudonyms, study materials will be maintained off-site at the home of the researcher on encrypted, password-protected computer. Paper documents will be stored at the home of the researcher in a locked file cabinet. And I added this in protections for participants are, I'm going to complete at least one, and I guess that's a mistake here, but at least one formal member check. I'm going to have, as many as needed, but I will complete at least one formal member check after I've interviewed an individual to make sure I'm understanding what they're saying properly. The official interviews will take place during the months of December of this year and January of next year, and will be held using the AnyMeeting web conferencing platform. Interviews will be recorded and data subsequently transcribed. Follow-up interviews will be held in the same format and center on clarifying responses and refocusing some questions as themes develop in data analysis. Okay, so the data analysis, how is that going to be done? Again, I'm following the basic principles of phenomenological design. The data analysis for data garnered or gathered through the interviews follows basic theme and pattern generation models allowed for in phenomenological design. Okay, first, interviews will be transcribed using old-fashioned technology, my listening and writing. And the reason why I'm choosing to do it this way is it's going to allow for my deeper understanding and processing of the responses. Asynchronous member check information. Asynchronous member check information will be recorded similarly, but also there will be some synchronous member checking as well. Responses will be coded, sorted, and analyzed for later theme generation, which ultimately points to my conclusions and interpretations. But getting back to code analysis and code creation, as an example, if a student replies that technology was a problem in their meetings, this could garner a coding of, say, 3. So if I start seeing several 3s in my transcription analysis, I begin to create the theme of technological difficulty as an experience. So this is how data will be analyzed in my study. So as the slide indicates, stakeholders in the proposed study include online graduate students, their departmental disciplines, its faculty and administration, and finally academic support departments, staff, and leadership. And talking quickly about my timeline, of note, presented in this timeline, IRB approval by the end of this month, local approval by the end of this month as well. And interviews completed by the end of January, data analysis completed by the end of February, conclusions, literature review update, and writing completed by the end of March, and finally dissertation presentation in April, which points to a May graduation. And I guess I'd close the presentation this evening with my thanks to Michelle Collet, who helped me narrow the scope of my study, Dr. Marilyn Newell with her involved guidance with the process, Dr. Ella Benson for her tiring looks at my first 3 chapters and her continued contributions, and finally my student colleague Shelley McClure, who has been instrumental in paving the way for several of us through this process.